Today's episode is brought to you by Kevel, the API-first SaaS solution proudly ushering in the retail media renaissance with their groundbreaking Retail Media Cloud. If you're sick of sharing your revenue or unimpressed by current black box solutions, there is another way, and we're not talking about building from scratch or going it alone. Kevel can help you optimize your on-site sponsored listings and boost your ROI. Help your retail media platform stand out with captivating user experiences. And best of all, you maintain full control of your data with our zero-touch data processing. The flexibility of Kevel's Retail Media Cloud is the solution built for you. To learn more, go to kevel.com/listen. That's kevel.com/listen. Welcome to the Marketecture Podcast. I'm Ari Paparo. I'm joined today by our special guest, Joe Hirsch, the CEO and founder of SpringServe, and now he's got a new company called Pilot Desk that he's the CEO of. Eric will join us for the second half of the show, but it's worth noting that Aperium is an investor in Pilot Desk, and I am involved with Aperium, and so is Eric. So we just get all those conflicts of interest out at the start. So let's just jump right in. So Joe, how you been?
Man, it's been a wild ride. I never really envisioned myself working at a public company, but after the sale of SpringServe, I found myself at Magnite and said to myself, I don't know how long I can have a boss.
You don't seem like the corporate type. You don't do you know how to use Outlook? Have you ever used Outlook?
No, I'm more of a Teams guy. Scheduling, I would say like calendars on my top 5 skill set is it's my 5th best skill. Being prompt is kind of a requirement at a public company, and God, I feel like I'm really just shooting myself in the foot here, but I'm just not a prompt person.
No, I mean, I think that the hardest part about being acquired is switching from a Mac with Google apps that work really well to this kludge of Microsoft crap that just doesn't do anything that you need it to do. It hurts the startup brain quite a bit.
I think I was lucky enough because I never registered my MacBook with IT. I feel like they might be coming after it at any moment now. There could be some confidential IP on that machine. I don't know.
Yeah, I have stories, but what can you do? So I want to kind of talk about SpringServe first. I feel like SpringServe is a little bit of a mysterious company. Here's how I would put it into perspective, which is, the video ad serving market was pretty moribund. There was basically Google and Freewheel. And it was that way because video ad serving is kind of really complicated. And you have all these broadcaster requirements and all these really weird business rules about sharing ad inventory. And no one wanted to do it, even though, the market kind of wanted an alternative. And then you were like the little engine that could. It was a pretty small company. You spun out, I think, of a different company. Maybe you could tell me the story. And then suddenly you were out there and you had an ad server that worked for video. Is that the story? What's your story?
I guess I can retell it. So originally, before SpringServe existed, I had a media agency called Yellowhammer Media Group. And Yellowhammer Media Group had 2 businesses. We had kind of a direct-to-consumer marketing company where, we focused on user acquisition and, we got really good at user acquisition and ultimately found that video was driving a lot of the user acquisition. And we were looking to kind of expand our video capabilities, and we were looking at the video ad serving products on the market. And ultimately, we kind of decided that we wanted to use LiveRail. And LiveRail was kind of this really cool video ad server at the time. And the other kind of products in the space at the time included Adapt TV. And then, like you said, there was Freewheel, Google Ad Manager. And none of these were really suited for building kind of what I wanted, which was an ad network where in the top of the ad network, we'd run direct sold, and behind the direct sold, we would run programmatic, and we would resell the programmatic to make a margin, and we would use kind of the direct sold to kind of get the foot in the door with direct publishers. This is like a typical kind of ad network, sheep's clothing style play. So, we started using LiveRail Central, we scaled on LiveRail Central, and then, we caught wind that Facebook was going to buy LiveRail. LiveRail Central was actually the name of the exchange inside of LiveRail. And when we heard that Facebook was going to buy LiveRail, we said to ourselves, well, is there anything else on the market where we can run a video ad network? Ultimately, we found that there wasn't. And then we decided we'd build our own. And so we kind of bifurcated the company Yellowhammer into 2 companies, Yellowhammer and SpringServe. And then ultimately, created kind of the first iteration of SpringServe. And I remember the day that we launched SpringServe, it was the day that LiveRail kicked off all of these ad network clients. And I wrote an email directly after they wrote an email kicking off all these ad network clients. We kind of collected 5 or 6 clients on the first day, and thus SpringServe was born.
That's such amazing insight to realize that was an opportunity after that LiveRail debacle started its slide downhill. I remember visiting your office when it was still Yellowhammer. It was like a Microsoft bomb had blown up in the AppNexus headquarters, and all of the refugees had ended up in your office. People with bandages on their head, and people who had just been like, "Man, what happened? I got to do something new."
Yeah, we were really lucky. We ended up with a lot of really great guys from AppNexus. Dave Buenasera, who's now the CTO of Magnite, Matt Dearborn, who's now the Chief Product Officer, Pilot Desk, and there was a lot of other great guys from Magnite they're still at Magnite, but they came from AppNexus as a byproduct of SpringServe. But, if you look at all of kind of the great startups, not to say that I had one or have one now, but they all kind of have this, background or history that originates from, kind of like the couple of fountainheads in our space where all of the key talent came from. You included Airy, including AppNexus. And, that's just those are just the places where I feel like there was a concentration of talent, 10, 15 years ago. And, what's like you were saying, the end of LiveRail was kind of the beginning of SpringServe, but, you could look at like the implosion of the Oracle ad business and say to yourself, well, here's another classic example. You have a mature business with hundreds or thousands of clients imploding. A lot of people look at it and they're like, well, obviously there's going to be a diaspora of jobs, but also it's a huge opportunity to kind of pick up what somebody decided was the toys that were kind of the no longer interested toys.
Yeah, I definitely buy that because AppNexus had great talent. Matt Dearborn, one of my favorite people. Does he still have a spatula collection? I remember that's just the one thing I always remember about Matt is his extensive spatula collection.
Yeah, he doesn't talk about it as frequently as he used to. It's definitely a good icebreaker as like a sales technique. I know that I bought him a spatula when I was in France most recently, and it's been collecting dust at my house for about 18 months. I keep meaning to give it to him, but I haven't.
If I could paraphrase you said it's good for sales. So is the spatula collection good for flipping accounts?
No comment.
I apologize. I want to just dive in a little bit more on one thing, which is it seems as though the LiveRail experience and then SpringServe brought a very like a programmatic first approach to video where, the majority of the monetization for a given publisher would be programmatic and then direct would be smaller. Whereas Freewheel on Google kind of went from the assumption of these big media companies where 90% was direct and they kind of looked down at programmatic. Freewheel in the early days certainly did. And that gave you, and to some extent, Publica, the opportunity to create the niche.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a cool thing to talk about. At the time when we were kind of operating in this weird capacity where we primarily serviced ad networks, which, by the way, a lot of great ad tech companies start by primarily servicing ad networks. This was before header bidding kind of made the leap in display to video. And at the time, there was kind of like this weird, kludgy, old technology in video called VPaid. And VPaid was this way to kind of hijack a page and run an auction in a page. And that was kind of the beginning of programmatic, or at least header bidding in video. And the first thing that we developed was a VPaid library that kind of called out to the header bidder adapters of the SSPs at the time. And that was kind of our first breakthrough product. And, I think now header bidding in video is kind of everywhere, but at the time that was a new concept.
Right. Because also the demand sources were limited. If you were an SSP, let's say, that wasn't focused on video, but wanted to get into the video game, it was kind of hard to get in there because you'd have to do deals with these big broadcasters and things like that. So this sort of VPaid meta auction in the browser opened up a lot of avenues to monetization.
Yeah, and then, the misnomer kind of came about server-side header bidding, which is kind of, I don't think anybody even, I guess people still call CTV header bidding server-side header bidding, but, the term header is kind of like a misnomer now that it's server-side and there's no real header in CTV. But that to me was kind of the turning point that kind of opened up programmatic for both desktop video and connected TV video. And, at the time, everyone had kind of these available adapters for header bidding. And Dave, who was our CTO at SpringServe, figured out that you could take the publicly available header bidding adapters for an SSP and kind of hack them into video, even if they weren't designed that way. And, that was kind of an early success that we had.
Man, this is just like a textbook example of disruptive innovation, because you just went after the market nobody else wanted, and then suddenly you were playing with the big boys. So at what point did you realize that? Did you say, oh, wow, this ad server can win big accounts, and this is like, we're a tier 1 ad server? Because you had some really big accounts using your ad server.
Yeah, well, I guess on the desktop side, I mean, the first kind of big publisher that I remember was this interesting company called Cinecore. They're kind of an old group now. Cinecore had the portal traffic for Yahoo and MSN and a variety of other kind of like portal-y locations. That was like the first big kind of direct publisher that we had on desktop. And then as we kind of flipped from desktop to CTV video, when I think about kind of the earliest adopter, I think about Vizio. And they, had like this nascent CTV ad business. They had WatchFree, which is their endemic channel service. And at the time, it was doing like a couple of million impressions a day. And they gave us a chance, and we grew that business to ultimately hundreds of millions of impressions a day, and not just focused on their video business, but also their home screen business, which, was kind of one of the last innovations at SpringServe, at least under my tenure, which was the ability to serve a display ad on a hardware manufacturer's home screen.
So it was as the consumers moved to a very different kind of viewing experience with smart TVs, streaming platforms, fast channels, the ad serving followed. It became much less about direct sales, much more about optimization. And then when the ad tech followed, the monetization followed, and now you have virtually every DSP and SSP involved in the connected TV market in some form, and the number of QPS and everything skyrocketing.
Yeah, and I think I'm probably partially responsible for some of that. I think everybody at some point in time discovered that inflating QPS in both display or video or mobile was kind of a cheap hack to get more demand.
Sure. So you sold the company, and then you retired with your billions of dollars. You're just skiing and sailing all day. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, minus the billions, SpringServe had a decent exit. I'm thankful for what we were able to achieve. We were kind of in a weird zone where COVID had just started. And at the beginning of COVID, the economics of SpringServe were pretty severely impacted. And I wasn't able to kind of fully see around the corner and see that right after kind of peak pandemic, or I guess lockdown period, that viewership in TV was going to skyrocket, and thus the use of SpringServe was going to go through the roof. And at the time, we needed kind of like a way to kind of stay afloat while the world was ending. And we took an investment from SpotX, and the SpotX investment included a call option. And the call option had a fixed ceiling. And at the time, I was really pleased with what the value of the call option was from SpotX. But, it was impossible to see that the business was going to explode in a positive trajectory, that Magnite was going to buy SpotX, that Magnite would acquire the call option from SpotX, and that Magnite would then execute the call option. And so I think it was a great experience, and I'm really, it's nice to have like a win under the belt, but sure, it could have been bigger. Who knows?
Yep. You never know. I get asked about this all the time for my various exploits, but now you're back. I don't know why, but you're back. You have a new startup. Some of the same team, new spatulas. What's up with Pilot Desk?
So, I mean, what's crazy, and you've seen this, I'm sure you saw this at Beeswax, once you kind of achieve scale, and scale is kind of a twofold thing in our space. So you could look at scale and you could say, scale means you're delivering a lot of impressions every day. Or you could look at scale and you could say, scale means a lot of people, humans, are interacting with my platform every day. And what was fascinating to me at the end of SpringServe, we had hundreds, if not thousands of daily active users in the platform. These are ad ops people. These are, account managers and all the kind of functionaries that are required to make an ad tech business scale. And, after studying kind of the tasks that these people are doing, whether it's trafficking or optimization or yield management, everyone's kind of doing the same thing over and over again. And, observing those repetitive tasks in ad ops ultimately led to the creation of Pilot Desk, which is, what if we, automated all of the tasks that people, routinely do in ad ops and offer it as a platform where people can kind of self-serve in a no-code capacity different things that they want to do in an ad platform.
I mean, ad ops requires a lot of skill, but also a lot of grunt work. And that's why people have been outsourcing stuff to India for dozens of years. So you built, is this AI, robotics, automation, or do you not want to label?
All those are pretty buzzy things. I mean, what I know, which is that, if you use the right buzzwords, maybe you can get a higher eval for your startup. But a lot of what we seek to do is less about improving human behavior through something like machine learning or artificial intelligence, and more about replicating it. And inevitably, if we can replicate human behavior, we can improve it afterwards. But you can't just go into a broadcaster and say, hey, we're going to take what's been done by humans for the last 20 years and put robots in charge. But instead of humans controlling the robots are going to think for themselves. That's just a little scary for where people are. And so, we try to meet the market where they are, which is, what if, you could set, these automations to mimic human behavior. And then later, as people become more comfortable with that, then maybe you can have the machine make the decisions on its own.
Yeah, that's how I feel comfortable using AI. Give me an AI paragraph or two, and then I'm going to edit it carefully. And I think the analogy is there for ad ops. So give us an example. What's a typical task that a customer would use on Pilot Desk?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the one that everyone is just so intimately familiar with is trafficking. So the insertion order comes in, the insertion order goes into an order management system or a CRM. Depending on what order management you're using, you might already have some degree of automation in place, but 9 times out of 10 people don't. And so an ad ops person picks up an order out of an order management system, and they kind of do data entry, and they take the information from the IO and they key it in. And that task sounds, fairly simple, but, you might have a campaign that's 20 line items, and each line item has different geo-targeting and audience targeting and budgeting and pacing, and kind of replicating all of the targeting parameters and associating all the creative to the line item and then assigning the weighting to the creatives. It could take 30, 40, it could take an hour or longer to traffic a single campaign. I mean, in complex campaigns where they're national campaigns, but each campaign is DMA targeted, in the case of local auto groups or, fast casual restaurants, those could be hundreds, if not thousands of line items. And then you have a trafficking task that could be, a whole day's project.
Right. So when I saw this, I saw the tool and I used it a little bit. My first reaction was shouldn't the platforms just enable that? Is it a problem that the pipes are not connected and someone should connect the pipes? Or is the problem that there's just too many pipes and it might take 20 years to connect them all?
Let's think about it. So maybe if you're a platform, you might create an automation into your own platform. All right. But you've looked at ad tech businesses. A lot of people use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 platforms, right? And if you are the operator of the ad tech platform, you're kind of solely interested in automation into your own platform. You would never create automation into a competitive platform. So if you're a business that's using more than one platform, you need a solution that's agnostic to any particular platform to sit on top of.
Right. It's sort of like the any-to-any integration problem. I'm a huge fan of Zapier. I use it from architecture quite a bit. And I feel like it's a similar problem in ad tech. So stepping back, though, not to make this whole thing a commercial for your new startup, what do you think the future is for ad ops as a profession and as the groups within media companies?
Sure. So I repeat this line every now and then, but the number of people employed in ad ops today, in my opinion, is at a maximum. And the number of people employed in ad ops, in my opinion, every month and every quarter until essentially the end of time will continue to go down. And you look at Google or Meta or Amazon, and they're achieving incremental revenue at scale and decreasing their cost. And what that means is that, they're using AI or they're using automation to achieve scale while lowering costs and increasing revenue. And if you're not a tier one media company like those guys, you need a tool to create this style of automation where you can continue to scale your business without scaling your cost. So when I look at the business and I think about like, what does the ad ops person of the future do? Well, the ad ops person of the future is responsible for programming and automation to act like, the internal proprietary AI of their business. And that's what I see Pilot Desk doing, is it enables, companies of all sizes to have their own version of this kind of automation and AI for their technology stack.
Yeah, I think what you see, I mentioned outsourcing earlier. That's one technique. Another is using tools to automate things like hashtag labs being an example, automate publisher integrations. Another is full outsourcing, like sending all your business to Raptive and letting them handle everything. And I think this is a different thing. This is, you still control the tools, you still have all of the platforms, but you're just taking some of what the humans do and make it automated.
The market demands more than one option, right? The market demands that there's an outsourcing option. The market demands that there's a fully internal team option. The market demands that there's an AI option. And inevitably, some people will go this direction, and will outsourcers struggle to compete against a machine? Probably. I think people originally outsourced ad ops because outsourcing was efficient. It was cheaper than it cost to do domestically. And if this is more cost efficient than outsourcing, well, some of those dollars might migrate this way.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Last time I saw you, we were at the Luma event, and I think Eric was there, Eric Franchi, and he said like he was happy to have invested in you. And I believe what you said was, well, you'll invest in anybody, so why am I so impressive? How was the? I'll give him a hard time in the second half of the show. But how was the reception to your pitch when you tried to raise money?
I don't want to overinflate the process or the ease of the process or how easy it was for me, but no one that we pitched said no. And part of that is because I only pitched people that I knew would say yes.
Right.
Because it's like a smaller world, and the people that I was pitching, I knew that they knew that this wasn't a solution to a non-existent problem. And I think that there are a lot of AI style startups that they just know that there's momentum and that the coattails are kind of easy to grab and that the money train is there. And I want all of those things too, but I also happen to think that Pilot Desk has a true solution to a true problem.
All right. I think we'll call it there. So we're going to take a quick break and then come back with the news of the week with Eric. So Joe Hirsch, the CEO of Pilot Desk, former CEO of SpringServe, thank you so much for sharing this time with us.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
This podcast is brought to you by Datonix. It's a challenge for any marketer to realize they have vast amounts of data, from sales and site analytics to in-store activity, yet still know so little about their customers. Datonix Audience Insights helps marketers deep dive into their first-party data, painting a vivid picture of their audiences. With over 1,400 demographic, interest, behavioral, and preference segments, you can truly understand who your customers are, what they like, and where they shop. Get to know the customers worth marketing to. Please visit datonix.com/explore-insights to learn more.
All right, and we're back. And now I have Eric Franchi with me from an undisclosed location. So, Eric, thank you for joining us. Are you at the Republican National Committee?
What are you talking about?
Well, I just figure all the venture capitalists are in Milwaukee, talking about how we should get out of Ukraine and stuff. Is that not the vibe?
No way. I am where I always am, in the great state of dirty Jersey.
All right. Let's do news of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so today's Wednesday. Even though we're middle of the week, we've got a bunch of stuff. So on the docket today, some interesting people moves, some interesting AI news. Google Doc was leaked with the SP 500 from TTD, and then interesting partnership that I don't know if anybody would predict. So let's get into it. People moves. Take from the top. So Brian Lesser. So last week, I had the news that Lauren was elevated to CEO of InfoSum. And just now, today, the news dropped that Brian Lesser is now the global CEO of GroupM. Surprised or not surprised?
Not surprised that he lined up a big job. I feel as though the exit from InfoSum was very tidy. He wasn't fired. It was obvious he wasn't fired. And Laura was great and she deserved the job, but it felt like he had something lined up. And I think a lot of people were expecting. This was a big job. This is like one of those top level premier jobs in advertising. So good for him.
Yeah, I think that's right. He has been there before, right? So he was one of the OGs of ad tech via 24/7. 24/7 acquired by WPP, and then they launched Xaxis, all that stuff. So he has experience there, and I think the future of holdcos increasingly they're ad tech companies, right? And they're data driven and sort of all that. So I think this is a really interesting role and probably the right kind of person to have at the top. So awesome.
Yeah, is GroupM the largest media buyer in the world, or is yeah, it's close to Publicis, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
It's a pretty powerful job. I think, there's probably like 10, 15 people. Unfortunately, they're almost all dudes who are like, CEO of large advertising company capable. And he's definitely one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Another New Jersey resident too.
Montclair?
Anyway.
Everyone's in every advertising person's in Montclair. Does Brian Lesser live in Montclair? We're going to dox him.
I don't know. I'm not doxing him. I've heard he lives in Jersey. Okay. All right. Another one that was maybe unexpected. I don't know. Dave Clark, who we had on the pod, I think earlier this year or last year, he is out as CEO of Triple Lift. What's your take there?
Yeah, love Dave. He's the guy who bought Beeswax, so I owe him big time, and he was a great guest on our show, one of the most popular episodes we've had. I think we all agree the Triple Lift was the peak. It was the top of 2021 private equity buying ad tech. They exited at something like $1.3 billion, maybe a little shy of that. And frankly, their comps are not good. Like they are a open web, for lack of a better term. They're an open web SSP with some technology, but really mostly a trading operation. And just last month, the comp is ShareThrough. ShareThrough is a direct comp to Triple Lift, and they got acquired in a private transaction. I don't think the number was disclosed, but it was probably in the low 9 digits, like the $100, $200 million range would be my guess for what they got in private illiquid stock. And then Dave Clark comes in, and he's CEO of a company whose private equity owners expect it to be worth $1.3 billion, and it may have been an impossible job. Now, I don't know anything else about what happened there, but it's definitely a company who got out ahead of its skis in terms of valuation.
Yeah, and that's obviously no fault of Dave's. I haven't been online much, but the thing that I thought was also interesting here is that there's no replacement for him, at least announced, but there is a leadership transition established by creating a interim office of the CEO, and that interim office of the CEO is led by Eric Rosa. Eric Rosa, folks probably know the name. He was the founder and CEO of Datalogix, another $1 billion exit to Oracle. He was the former owner and CEO at CrossFit, and he's been on the board of and an investor in a bunch of companies. Eric is a beast. He is so good. And I think he has a role at Vista. I think he's like got if not a GP, an equivalent position. So I'd imagine, kind of bringing in someone with the right industry expertise in the interim is the right thing to do there. So it's logical to have Eric there. So I'd be interesting to see what moves he makes, if any, and if maybe the move is just to hire another CEO. But I'm a huge fan of Eric. Okay,
that's great to hear. I think that the PE model is often to run a company according to a blueprint, to run it like a SimCity game. And so do you need a strong CEO in that environment if you already have a really great team? Andrew Eifler, let's call out to Andrew Eifler, the chief product officer of Triple Lift, very well-respected guy. He worked for me at AppNexus for about a week before I got fired, but he's a good guy. There's a lot of good people there.
Oh, yeah. Andrew King, VP of Product Management, I think. he's awesome. Like they've got a great team. I think that's an interesting point, but somebody needs to, execute on said roadmap. And Vista does have, it's very well known, like a blueprint that they apply to all companies. And in most markets, it's worked. In most companies, it's worked. It's like one of the best performing, SaaS PE firms, I think, ever. So it's interesting to see what happens.
Did I ever tell you about the Andrew Eifler story about how he worked for me? I was the head of product management for AppNexus, but I didn't know he worked for me. Brian O'Kelly never told me. So he was just sort of hanging around my desk a lot. And I was like, cool, Andrew, whatever. And he's like, what should I do? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, you're in this other division. I have no idea. But apparently he had changed divisions into product management. I was supposed to mentor him, but no one told me. And then I got fired, and I'm not sure it was entirely my fault. But those were good times.
How long did he work for you and you didn't
Like a week.
know?
A week.
Oh, okay. All right. Wasn't like an office space situation.
I also had another guy who worked for me at AppNexus who stopped working for me and they didn't tell me. So this other dude, Errol, who's one of the smartest people I've ever met, and he just transferred into engineering, but no one told me. And I continued to have conversations with him as if he was moving my product agenda forward, but he was not. So there's some gaps in HR management there for a while.
Startup life. What can I tell you? Okay, we'll move on to some AI news. So this one is interesting. Perplexity to share revenue with publishers from its ads program. So Perplexity, one of the kind of new generative AI services, being used as a search engine. The plan is to pay publishers when ads are shown on answers generated from the publisher content. So I went to Perplexity. I actually just clicked on one of the suggested questions, which is who is the next James Bond? The answer is there's no James Bond. But I got an answer with like the leading suggestions for the next James Bond or the rumors, and it's sourced by a bunch of different news publications. So if you do this along with me, people of Marketecture, you'll see that this is it's actually quite busy of a page. So there's images, there's sources, there's the answer. I mean, it's a kind of a cluttered experience already. So for me, the question is, where are these ads going to be and what will they look like? And, is this just going to end up being some sort of like buried in a sea of content display experience or, something that's like AdWords where, it's going to be a transformational product? I don't know. You have any sense?
Yeah, the ad format is a good question. I really don't know because these Perplexity results are very rich, like you said. But I do think that the big story here is that Perplexity went from being like the bad guy of journalism to the good guy in like one announcement. Because if just a week or two ago, they were starting to say, well, Perplexity is scraping our content and creating pages based on our content. And now they're saying, well, even if we do that, you're still going to get paid. And I think that's a very progressive approach. And I think publishers still are going to have to negotiate and figure out how much they're getting paid because they're on the wrong end of this a little bit. Or they're on not the wrong end, but their content being used by somebody else to create content is not a position they're excited about. But, I think this makes a ton of sense that they're going to work backwards to figure out where the content came from and then pay. That's a great model.
It's very clear how this can work. My question is, how will it work? How will it look in practice? So this is an audio only pod, but for you, Ari, I actually shared the results page.
Right.
It's quite busy.
Well, I guess if you were to think about a query that was very commercially oriented, so what should I do on vacation in Aruba? And it's taking all the content from all the travel sites. Those travel sites getting paid might be sufficient. That might be a great compromise position for them to get paid for the effort they've made to create content.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, having some sort of sponsored answer, right? That's like maybe just the only one is an interesting way to do this. And, I'd imagine for some of these really high intent type of searches, i.e. not the one I did, which is who's the next James Bond, it could prove to be like really, really profitable.
Well, you don't want the answer to be wrong. You want it still to be the best answer. And so when I asked the Aruba example, I really want to know the best places in Aruba, and then maybe the links are affiliate, or there's an ad for someone who's not in that list, and it's a standard display or text ad. No matter what, the folks at TripAdvisor or whatever travel-related site who created the content the AI is scraping to give the better answer should get paid. So
yeah,
I'd love to see this play out and see how it works out.
Yeah, this whole category is one to watch. Obviously, with what OpenAI is doing, just with the licensing deals, is clearly leading the market right now. But there's lots of room to come. All right, here's a question for you: who is 101 or Programmatic 101 on Twitter? Is this another pseudonym that you're going to acquire? Is this a friend of ours that I don't know? Like, who is this account?
I got my Amex card on the table. If you have more than 100 followers, give me a call. I'm buying. So I don't know. I don't remember. I might know, but I don't remember offhand who it is. It's not someone I remember very obviously.
All right. So Programmatic 101 has produced a list of the TTD SP 500 Plus and has made it public. And it's super interesting. Did you take a look at it?
Yeah, I did. I will put it in the newsletter coming out Monday, the link, as we usually do. So I asked this question online, which is, maybe I'm an idiot and this is obvious, but there's no resellers on the list. You can't buy Taboola, Outbrain, Teads on this list. They're not on the list. And I'm wondering if they're totally shut out of SP 500 Plus because they're not direct, or if they're considered direct for their format within the SP 500 Plus. That was just my reaction, was that there was no ad tech companies on the list.
That's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, traditionally, resellers of standardized inventory have not been able to, get traction at TTD. But for unique formats, exclusive providers of unique formats, I would hope that they're facilitating the buying.
They should,
but I don't know.
Yeah, so like the Raptives of the world are considered direct because they have exclusive sales rights for the companies under their umbrella. So I'd assume that's also why they call it SP 500, so sellers and publishers. Raptive would be a seller in that case. Publisher would be a blog or a website underneath Raptive. But I really have not got an answer to the question about unique resellers, which is sort of this gray area between the two. So that was my reaction. There's a lot of other good reactions. I want to hear yours.
I looked at it. I scanned it. I just like, it's one of those weird things I nerd out on. Just maybe from like the ad network PTSD.
The undertone.
When I see a site list. Yeah, I just jump in like I'm actually going to do something with it. So it's interesting, and I wonder how this was created, and how it's ranked. Basically, the top 100, which had been published or leaked before, it's CTV, it's big legacy media, it's names that you recognize, just with media companies. From like 100 to the 280s, it's a lot of what you would consider open web and companies that are, like in many cases programmatic first, a lot of like recognizable blogs. And then it gets a little random. There's a whole section, and I went pretty deep. So from 286 to 299, it's a bunch of mobile games. So I guess to give a nod to, some of the app install campaigns and the ability to, have a mobile presence. And from 300 on, basically to the end, it's all local news, which I wasn't surprised about given, what I sat in on at Cannes at the Journal House with Jeff Green saying, local news is, super important and a big part of the SP 500. This is a list that could have existed 5 years ago or 10 years ago. There's not a lot of, frankly, any new names on it. And that was the biggest thing for me. It's just like, it's a list of big open web publishers. And I also wonder how clients are buying this. Are they buying this as a package? Are they getting like full transparency into like cost and performance? Like, how is this actually being provisioned? Do you know?
So, yeah, well, by all accounts, it's a include list that's at the system level. So it's a level higher than a normal include list, which means it's on by default for all new campaigns. And you can't turn it off. It's even on by default for API customers, which is something I covered in my newsletter. So if you have some API integration with the trade desk and you're pushing campaigns in, suddenly every single campaign is include list to the SP 500 plus. Sorry, I always forget the plus. I think the trade desk is doing itself a little bit of a disservice in the sort of sloppy way they've organized this situation, in that they have not really explained what 500 means. Is it the top 500 or is it just 500? Is it limited to 500? And then what's the plus mean? It's not actually 500. It might be 505, might be 600, might be 700. It's very sloppy, in my opinion. And I believe the observations you made, which are great, haven't seen this previously, about how there are like bands of certain kinds of publishers in certain numbers. It's just indicative that the list has kind of been built by hand, and then they retroactively said there was some methodology here, or else it wouldn't be clumped up like that. Like they would be totally random. And then they did themselves an even bigger disservice by publishing a PDF downloadable report that appeared to not just list, but rank the top 100. I don't think there's any indication that there's any ranking from 101 to 500. It's just a list. And this is just, I would say, sloppy work on their part. They didn't have to do it this way. They could have had a stronger story here from the product marketing perspective.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, we'll put the link in the newsletter, I'm sure. One more in terms of big announcements that have everybody riled up. So Axios reported that Apple and Taboola have a deal for putting Taboola placements mostly in English-speaking markets in news and stock areas of Apple News. A couple interesting things here. So number one, Apple Taboola, interesting partnership. I don't think anyone would have predicted that. So good on Taboola, great on Taboola, cracking that. Number two, previously NBC had some kind of exclusive here, right? So this replaces the NBC deal?
It doesn't, apparently. I've been doing some reporting about this. And by reporting, I mean just emailing some friends of mine. And it's very hard to tell what's going on here, but it's definitely NBC's not out. But I think the perception is that NBC was really producing some pretty low CPMs out of the deal, probably because it's an identity wasteland. You don't know anything about the consumer, and there's very little reporting. So NBC, with their kind of demand that was probably very brand centric, wasn't the best fulfiller of the inventory. I've also heard that there already were other parties besides NBC involved here, like other native parties that were doing some monetization. So it appears that it's opening up to a bunch of different parties to do the monetization. I've been trying to find information about the big questions, like who controls the quality of the ads, how does the rev share work, who controls the ad placement. I've run into a brick wall. No one either knows or wants to talk about it. I emailed some people who were like senior monetization executives at major publishers, and they said more or less like, it's such a small number, I don't even care.
Apple News
advertising. So subscriptions, as we reported here and some other journals reported, is turning into a nice number for some publishers in the 7 figures per year. The ad revenue from news and stocks, well, news, I guess, in particular, is just a very, very small number, and it's just not moving the needle either way.
And maybe that's the thesis behind this deal, right? Like the advertising revenue, because it's the identity wasteland, there's not much to do. With Taboola and placements like this, it's largely contextually driven, which I saw you talking about. So I think there's probably a train of thought that, number one, this might be the right way to monetize. Something like this is the right way to monetize.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but in the descriptions of how it's going to work, which are very slim, they said it was going to be part of the feed, which implies that when as a consumer, you're looking at the Apple News app trying to figure out what to read, there may be some suggested articles in there powered by Taboola, which is a product they've released with many mobile carriers. They have a product that's like news, white labeled news for mobile carriers product, which is not a chum box. That's like a real recommendation engine that adds value to both the consumer and the publications. So I think that would fit very well with Apple's ambitions and would potentially be, revenue accretive to Apple.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, my initial reaction was, it just makes sense because all these publishers work with Taboola or Outbrain, one of the two for their O&O, right? So It's not a leap to think that this just makes sense to do. I did wonder, just given Apple's history of like being like so quality focused and back in the iAd days, like about creative, like a Cargo or someone like that, would that make a lot of sense here? And maybe that stuff is under discussion. We don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they could have done something a little bolder, a little more brand oriented. My position is that I think this is a very, very small revenue line and is not that important compared to the billions of dollars Apple's making on the App Store, search-related ads and things.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it got people riled up from what I can tell.
Really got people riled up. It really did.
It's a hot button. All right. Well, that's the news of the week. A couple other things going on with respect to the T's and C's for Google Sandbox and what happens with GARM. Maybe we'll put that in the newsletter and end it here, right?
Yeah, I just want to point out quickly that Apple released its new Private Browsing 2.0 privacy standards, which is for WebKit, which is Safari ultimately, and as well as the Chrome browser on phones. And it really took aim at fingerprinting. They were implementing all kinds of fingerprinting controls, and they also took some pot shots in their blog post against Chrome, both Chrome private browsing as well as the Chrome topics implementation. So it's pretty clear. It's interesting. I love to hear them talking about it. Apple saying publicly what they really think on some of these technical issues, as opposed to just the very high level branding. But it's pretty clear that Apple and Google are not aligned about the future of how browsers operate. It's worth a read. I'll put it in the newsletter on Monday.
Clearly. Who is hurt with this on the fingerprinting side?
Well, anyone who fingerprints. They did a number of things in their announcement about known trackers. They kept saying known trackers, and they don't have that as a defined term. So they're doing things like eliminating parameters in the URLs that might be tracking enabled, like not UTM parameters, but things that might identify a user directly. So I would suggest that it's anyone who's claiming they could identify users on Safari are going to have to go back to the drawing board.
Got it. Okay. All right. So that's there's people that are doing that. So
there are.
Back to the drawing board you go, people.
All right. Well, this is a great episode. Eric, thank you for your accommodation of doing news for the week, but missing out on the Hirsch interview, which was not as epic as I thought. He told me, we brought up the issue about when he said like, "Oh, Aperium, they'll invest in everyone," but I remember that gave you quite a laugh at when he popped that out.
Yeah, that was a funny moment.
Put that in your LP deck, I guess.
Amazing. All right. Well, thanks, Harry.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you for subscribing to Marketecture. New interviews are added every week at marketecture.tv and your favorite podcasting app.
Thank you for listening to the Marketecture podcast. New episodes come out every Friday, and an insightful vendor interview is published each Monday. You can subscribe to our library of hundreds of executive interviews at marketecture.tv. You can also sign up for free for our weekly newsletter with my original strategic insights on the week's news at news.marketecture.tv. And if you're feeling social, we operate a vibrant Slack community that you can apply to join at adtechgod.com.